You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I am Dustin and Tony is with me and we are here to discuss all of the service news from the past week. There hasn't been a whole lot, but there was a couple of things. If you've listened to some of the last couple episodes that we released, you might remember that there was a couple of different things that we talked about that we were definitely going to be focusing on this episode. One of them is, in fact, Quibi had a keynote at CES last week, so we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about Quibi. And then we also have a pretty decent discussion about the popularity of The Mandalorian versus the popularity of The Witcher, whether or not one is more popular than the other, based off of a lot of conversations that have been happening online, so we're going to kind of break that down. If you haven't heard, we gave our review of The Mandalorian last episode, and I talked about The Witcher as well and gave my review of that. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to go back and check out that on the last episode. Today, we're focusing on the services, and because of that, we're going to be talking real quick about a couple of news briefs before we get into the Quibi and some of our other discussions. So first up, Warner Media also was present at CES, and while they didn't have a huge flashy presentation, they were in fact there, and they did have a couple executives, specifically Chief Technology Officer was there, and their EVP and GM of Direct-to-Consumer was there as well. And they talked about a couple of different things, but most of what they talked about is not stuff we haven't heard in the past. Biggest thing that they talked about was that they, unlike a lot of their competitors, refuse to be similar in the sense of having the endless scroll where you just keep scrolling and seeing content forever and ever and ever. They don't want that. They want to be able to have content that's very highly curated for the user, and they focused a lot on that. They said that they don't want to focus on the grid-oriented that a lot of the other competitors do as well, and they're trying to make sure that while they will be using tech to, and AI to basically figure out the best suggestions, they're also using human curation, which I'm guessing will kind of work its way into the tech side of it. The humans are training the AI rather than the AI just going at it and using their algorithms. They were also asked about a couple of other quick questions, specifically whether or not there's certain shows that have seen success. They come from one network and they move over to another network. The one that specifically came up as an example is the show You, which was previously on Lifetime, moved over to Netflix, got immensely more popular because it was on Netflix and got a lot more traction and grew in popularity. And they were specifically asked, which shows are you looking at and saying these shows are going to get a huge boost once we move them over to HBO Max? And they specifically said, actually, all of them. We actually see a lot of these shows gaining a lot more popularity because they are on HBO Max, and that would obviously apply to shows they are moving from existing networks, but also shows that are moving from existing services as well, like DC Universe and things like that. So if the content is moving over, it's obviously going to be available to a wider audience, larger audience, based off of the number of subscribers, just based off of what HBO currently has. So it seems as if that obviously answers that question. They also stated, and they understand that bundling is a big deal. Disney teamed up with Verizon to offer theirs. T-Mobile recently announced that they're going to be teaming up with Quibi. There's other technology companies that have bundled a service with their service, and they understand that to a much larger degree, specifically because it's all within the same company. They understand that HBO Max is very important to helping their wireless side, and for them it's more profitable because the company's in-house and they're not having to pay money outside of the main company. So not a whole lot was here that wasn't discussed before, but it is worth mentioning just because they were one of the few other services that were present actually at CES talking about their service. Next up, this one is not really, honestly, I'm going to preface this with, I saw this article pop up. I thought it was odd timing. I read through it. It came across as more of a prediction rather than actual news, but I'm going to bring it up just because I saw it pop up in a couple different spots online. People were referencing it back, and I thought it was a little odd that it kept popping up even though it was not necessarily anything new. So we've talked about this at length in the past about how Netflix has been trying a variety of different plans overseas in different areas, specifically India and Malaysia. We've talked about in the past about how Netflix is offering mobile-only plans starting at a much lower price point where you can only use your phone for the service, but if you pay more money, you could still use it on your television. But those specific markets, there's a lot of customers who just have a phone. There's not a lot of people who have good in-home internet or, a big TV and things like that. So if they have a phone, they can get to a customer and they're not forcing the customer to pay a lot more money to be able to have that access for something that they don't actually use. We've talked about this. We've said that it's a good thing and we can see it growing in the future. Well, this article over on the Hollywood Reporter basically lays out a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about in the past with how there's existing plans in India and Malaysia. As the article continues, they just keep laying out how Netflix is doing a lot more international rollout, and they continue to, focus on a lot of individual markets. They bring up some of the India deals that we've talked about, how Netflix has promised that they're going to invest about $400 million to create original content for the Indian market. We've talked about all of this stuff, but for some reason, the Hollywood Reporter thought that this was new news and proceeded to write up an article saying that this is exactly what the title, Netflix expected to bring more mobile-only plan to more markets. The thing is, I read through the article and I was waiting for them to say Netflix has commented on the fact that they are looking to expand their mobile-only plan to other markets and things like that, and they did not actually say anything like that. There was no quote specifically that were new from Netflix. It really just came across as they were saying, hey, this is working in India, hey, this is working in Malaysia, and expect it to happen elsewhere. But we don't have any real explanation behind that statement other than it makes perfect sense, which it does. It does make perfect sense. So while, again, there's not really any news, I feel obligated to bring it up because the Hollywood Reporter is not exactly a small site by any means. And when things like this get brought up on a larger site, other places start talking about it as if it's new news, when in reality, if you follow this stuff on a normal basis, we know this is not new news. This is something that's been talked about at length for the last couple of months, and we've personally have talked about it at length for the last couple of months.
Yeah, this isn't really news. You're right, and kind of it's a little bit of speculation, but yeah, it offers flexibility. It's I just say it just you can read the article and you can the listeners and you can see how much it doesn't tell you anything new, and it gives some speculation about at the very end it talked about the quote to quote Wall Street analysts blank by blank, and it's just guesses, and so I'll just stop. Mobile plans are kind of in the future, and we'll see how they work. I kind of want to see the numbers on that. You got to reach a certain point where you kind of break even, and I wonder what that break even point is, given if you look at this microcosm of just mobile only plans, like what is the break even point per user. So that's the one concern I have about this, but you know what, more people get Netflix, so that's always nice.
So those are the only two news pieces we have that are not related to Quibi or our larger discussion about The Mandalorian and The Witcher. So let's just dive into Quibi. So if you caught a brief synopsis of what Quibi is based off of what we brought up last week on our content news, which I tried to focus on the content, but I did run down a couple of bullet points about the price, when it's coming out, things like that. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth, and I've read a couple of more articles that explain some more things. I've read some interviews with the people behind it and tried to get a better understanding of what exactly they're going for. So CES, for those of you who are unaware, or those of you outside the States who are not familiar with CES is the Consumer Electronics Show, which is held in Las Vegas every single year. Basically, the gist of the show is it's like a trade show where where a lot of companies will come and they'll showcase off their new technology that they're offering consumers. And while a streaming service is definitely something that will be offered to consumers, it's not necessarily technology in the sense of it's not a physical device, but not everything is physical. So it's fine that it makes sense for Quibi, who wants to be rooted very much in the technology as well as the entertainment side of the business, to do a keynote talking about their service. Specifically, there was a number of executives from a variety of different companies that came forward. They showcased some of the content. They gave a demonstration of what actually Quibi is and how what they called their turnstile viewing, which is a patent pending way of going from portrait mode to landscape mode, or from vertical to horizontal viewing seamlessly. And that part of it is actually pretty cool, but we'll get into that in a second. But the main bullet points that a lot of people were interested in is how much is it going to cost? We already knew it was it was going to be launching on April 6th. There isn't a whole lot of news regarding more of the content or more of what we know is coming, because as we've known for the last couple of months, especially if you have been listening to the show for a while, Quibi releases a lot of information about new shows that are coming to the service on a pretty regular basis. Almost every episode we've done featuring content news has at least 3 to 4 news points about Quibi and new shows that are coming to the service. So they didn't really focus on the content as much. They just focused on, they have a lot of content. There's a lot of people who are, going to be working with Quibi. The other part of this is, and we discussed this back when we had what is Quibi as one of our discussion points a couple months back, but Quibi is a company that is basically licensing content from production companies to provide content for them. The one thing that I find slightly interesting was there was an interview that was done with the people behind the CEO and the founder of the service. They basically said that Quibi has no intention of creating their content themselves. All of the content that will be on the service is actually being created by outside production companies, meaning any content that you're seeing is not actually owned by Quibi, it's owned elsewhere, and Quibi is licensing it to put it on their service. The part that makes it interesting is that if you listen to our What is Quibi, Quibi is actually has investors from almost every major entertainment company in Hollywood. Quibi has raised over $1 billion in investments specifically from a lot of these companies, as well as some other companies involved in technology. And those companies that are, at least some of the companies that have been investing in them, are now being paid back to create content for the service, which, okay, that's not unheard of. That's happened before. But the difference is that the content that's being created, because Quibi doesn't actually own it, they're basically paying the money back to some of their original investors to create content for this service. And if it doesn't work out, the investment isn't necessarily going to go away, isn't completely lost necessarily from the original investors, because they're getting some of that money back by creating content for the service. So there's that, which to me just throws up a red flag, but I can step aside and just walk past that for right now. The other part is that the service, they're making this big point about how everything is these smaller bites. 6 to 10 minute episodes is their general format. And while I acknowledge that is a perfect time frame to, especially for a lot of the daily essential shows that they're promoting, which is like the news shows and the sports briefs and, giving the highlights of what's happened. That's a perfect time length to get caught up with that kind of stuff. But the problem is that there's content that already exists out there that is on YouTube that does exactly that. And the difference, of course, is that you can watch YouTube completely for free and have ads, or you can pay for YouTube Premium and get rid of the ads, but you can have all of that content available that's on YouTube ad-free. Quibi is expecting customers to pay $5 a month for an ad-supported version of the service, or $8 a month for a ad-free service. The thing is, why would you pay $5 for content that is already readily available elsewhere?
Because of the creators. I mean, that's why. It's because of the creators. They attach those people to the names. I mean, yeah, forget the news and stuff. That's not going to be on there. But I mean, you got, like Steven Spielberg. They've signed up other creators that are big names, and so that is what's drawing. I think that's what they're hoping is to draw is, yes, you do have the mobile only content, and yeah, $5 and $8, and you have this cool, experience. But I think it's the creators and what innovative IP can they deliver and spread by word of mouth. Because for me, honestly, Quibi kind of reminds me of director Zack Snyder. After he stepped down from Justice League to deal with the death of his daughter, he ended up being a teacher at this college about film, and he was talking about how creating film via the phones, right? And so this was back a few iPhone series back, but the cameras were still pretty nice. And so he made a course about, shooting video on the phones. And so he made a demo, and it's called Snow Steam Iron. And you can see this beautiful, 5-minute short story. And it's beautiful. And he got a lot of press because it is Zack Snyder, who is a big name director. And what I'm trying to say is yes, he released that on this obscure social media site. And that's kind of what made it a little bit famous, Vero. And if they can get creators of that same caliber, right? Spielberg, et cetera, like big names in the industry who create good content. That's what they're selling is those people's work. I think the tech stack is interesting. I think the idea of flip the phones is interesting, but that's where I think that they're going to deliver content is premium content, but in short form. which is kind of hard to do. I mean, I can see some of these creators failing in delivering good content on a phone because you're only limited to like 10 minutes, etc. And so if they can create good IP, that's what they're going to sell the service with.
And I don't disagree in the sense of there is obviously some talent here that is going to be attached to it. The problem is that I don't think there's enough talent that is attached to make this worthwhile. And the reason I say that is because, while yes, the directors and the people behind the camera who are creating content like Steven Spielberg, Guillermo del Toro is one of the creators who's creating. Then I know that the director from the Twilight films is involved. Antoine Fuqua is... I'm pronouncing them wrong, I'm sure, but he's doing a project. There's some other people who are doing projects. I'm not denying that some of those creators could do really great projects, but let's be honest, they're coming on board to do a single project. The shows that they have that are not movies are being headlined by celebrities, but the celebrities are just there to do their job. They're there to be in the show. And while we know that there's plenty of content out there that exists where celebrities come in and do whatever they're supposed to do and people watch it because that celebrity draws in people, it doesn't always translate to a ton of viewers. Just look at YouTube Red and how that didn't really turn out very well. It's one of those things where the ideas of a director certainly can do something that can be very well done and can draw people in, but I don't know if there's going to be enough of that type of content. I think that while you are not wrong, and I would love to see that specific content from the people, the creative people who are creating this type of content, I have a distinct problem with, I don't think that that's what the main focus of the service is. When you look at, they released this graphic at the keynote that was a triangle, and basically the bottom was like the daily essential shows, the news and sports, which is going to make up a bulk of the amount of content that they have every single day. Then there's above that, the middle tier of the triangle is actually going to be their new shows that are most, that are headlined by celebrities and things like that. And then the top of the pyramid is these movies, which will be released in the chapter forms. And I think that triangle speaks volume to not only the premium, what is higher quality, but it'll also speak volumes to the amount of what there is. Because I definitely agree that there's a group of people who would specifically seek out content from specific creators and directors and things like that, but I don't know that there is as much. Like, they're hyping up the fact that Spielberg is doing a project, but is Spielberg producing a project or is Spielberg actually directing the project? I don't know, because they just keep using his name as he's connected to this project. And I will say that the project sounds really interesting. Just to go off on a small tangent, it's like Spielberg After Dark, and I believe it's an anthology series where you tell different stories. What's really unique is because it's a mobile only, and this is something that I think could be used for a lot of different things, and the technology aspect of Quibi has a lot of reach of what it can do compared to what it can't do. Your phone knows exactly what time it is, and your phone knows what time the sun goes down. So Spielberg went to Quibi and said, hey, I want to make a show, but the show, I only want it to be able to be viewed when it's dark outside. So you can't actually view it except for when it's dark. So they had to figure out how to do it, to make it work, but they figured out how to basically tell the app to know what time it is where you are locally located so that you can then view something when the sun goes down, which the integration of something like that is really cool and unique, but that's just one integration. Some of the other projects that they've talked about or that are happening and things like that, there's movies that are incorporating, the split screen in the sense of like you can watch the movie in the full screen horizontal mode, and if you turn it, you'll see, what the character's phone looks like from the point of the view of the actual phone. Stuff like that, I could see it incorporated well. There's been a couple of movies recently, Searching and Unfriended, that came out that focused heavily on the use of a phone and how it interacts with the story, and I could see it working very well. I'm curious to know how the other aspects of this work, because, having a movie that's just broken up into chapters, okay, is it going to be, if you view it all at once, does it come across as a movie, or does it actually feel like a television episode where you have like a finite ending or a cliffhanger? Is that how it's going to be? That's the thing that I guess I'm questioning about how they're going to work that kind of stuff. And a lot of that can be resolved by, releasing maybe like a preview of one of the shows that they've got, something that's not necessarily one of their top tier shows, but something that showcases a lot of what they can do. A lot of what they've actually released officially just showcases like the ability to like, look at the phone one way, flip it the other way, and shows what it does, but it doesn't explain while you're looking at that what the intent of what it's supposed to be doing is. They've released a couple of advertisements, and that was the other thing. For some reason at the keynote, they focus very heavily on the fact that the advertisers are really loving the idea that they can do unique and different things with the technology behind Quibi, and that's cool, but I'm not sure as a consumer that I really care about whether or not an advertiser can really use the thing. That sounds more like something that you'd be pitching to advertisers and less to consumers.
To interject, so Snapchat, they have kind of like their own like daily shows. It's like Quibi, but before Quibi, and nothing crazy. But I know they have different news ones, and I know they have a sports one, ESPN. But I remember a story where I think it was an advertiser, maybe it was like Coca-Cola or somebody. They were talking about advertising on Snapchat, and they did mention how since usually ads like on YouTube, you have to turn your phone sideways or whatever, and not phone sideways. The ads are in widescreen, so it just automatically looks weird on your phone, but you have to turn it sideways to kind of get the full experience. And obviously that's not going to be good engagement because who likes that? And they did mention how Snapchat's just in portrait mode all the time. They did mention how they were able to create a little bit of different of an ad experience. It wasn't like too crazy. I'm not talking about like Quibi type, changing perspectives and whatnot, but they were able to change their approach, and they did see more engagement with, having it in a portrait mode, with having it a little bit different for like mobile friendly, and not only engagement in terms of like people clicking on stuff and whatnot, but even like a positive sentiment about like, hey, like this ad isn't that bad because it's already in portrait mode. And you can make, right, if you're already watching Quibi, right, and right now, since I'm mentioning like Coca-Cola, I'm going to use that example, right? I'm watching some Quibi show, and all right, so it's time for an ad, and I can imagine like a Coca-Cola, like bear, the Coca-Cola, polar bear type commercial happening, and then you can like change perspectives. Like I can see that being a little bit cool, and like they don't have to go like super crazy and expensive, maybe like Spielberg in terms of like what kind of angles and whatnot. But I can see that engagement could potentially go up because it is easier on the user. Like not many people like ads, but if you give me an ad that's functional, right, that's easy to use, easy to see, and is slightly relevant, I'm gonna like that better. And so it was an interesting, post-mortem of advertising on Snapchat, because not only did they have higher engagement in terms of like clicks and click-throughs and whatnot, but like a positive sentiment about the whole entire ad experience, and it being, if they had to rank it in terms of like mobile experiences of ads, it was favorably higher than the competitors. I mean, you shouldn't like Quibi, like CES stage shouldn't advertise necessarily that, for the consumer, but like on the flip side, that is kind of like a hidden bonus for the consumer. But I wouldn't necessarily go brag about like how your ads kind of work.
Yeah, my thing was, it just, to me, it just came across as like, why aren't you focused? I don't know if they're planning on doing some other sort of like big presentation at some point in the future. I haven't heard about anything, but if they're not, I felt like this should have been the opportunity for them to like focus on at least some of the content. Like showing demos makes sense. I completely understand doing that, but they actually had executives come out from like Pepsi and say like, "Hey, look, we've made this awesome ad." And like that part of it doesn't make a lot of sense. They had other executives that just had quotes that were like, "Oh yeah, we're really looking forward to what they're doing." And it just comes across as great. You've got some friends in Silicon Valley, and that's great. But that doesn't mean that the service is going to be great for me as a consumer. Show me as the consumer what I want, what my $5 is going to get me, or what my $8 is going to get me.
Yeah, I just remember we were talking about this right off air the day that this announcement happened, and you kind of brought that point home privately, and then our text messages, and I was just like, yeah, it's just you got like Meg Whitman, they just know people, and so just getting the CEO of Google just an endorsement from them, even if it's as robotic and kind of disingenuous as possible, that's what you do for a startup. It's like, hey, here's all the hype about it, everyone get hype, you know what I mean, and that's kind of their strategy, at the end of the day. I don't know about you, but the more I think about Quibi, I don't think it's a dumb idea. I think it can have a place, but for me, I think that they should just, the lowest tier should be just ad supported and free, and then maybe do $8 for like ad free or something, just because like I think paying $5 for ad free is a little bit ridiculous, but if you just do ad free and then do a little bit higher for premium price, I think that could work. And the reason why I say that is because I forget if we mentioned this, but it has been reported that Quibi's, before they even, launched, they already pre-sold all their ad space. You know what I mean? And so if you have all these companies that are vying for a place, at the table, the Quibi table, long before it even starts, like supply and demand, like if everyone wants it, charge a little bit more in ad prices, the ad fees to kind of cover that. And so that's, to me, I think that's a good offset, because with it being mobile and you get 10 million subscribers or even more, like, that's great for the next generation, for these companies to target the next generation of different, items. And I think that's great for them, and I think it's great for everyone. But if they want, that consumer so bad, I think that they should pay a little bit more, and that we, we just suffer with the ads, for the ad-free version. And not like suffer in a bad way, just like paying $5 for ads to me is a little bit ridiculous.
It is.
And just at the end of the day. It is. Since they have the opportunity to charge more just by the laws of economics and for the next round of advertising.
To me, it comes across as they didn't think about this, because here's the thing. Okay, so the other part of this discussion, which is something that I actually saw back in December, it's been sitting on our plate of things that I wanted to bring up, but now is the best time to bring it up. There was a survey that was done across American, and on the report, it specifically said, this was released by OpenSignal, and they reported that 39% of American consumers watch TV and 28% of them watch movies on their mobile devices, which means on average, 39% of American consumers use their mobile devices to watch content that is either movies or TV shows. That's not a very high percentage, but when it's broken down into the demographics, it says 55% of Gen Z and 52% of millennials stream on mobile devices, making them the most popular age groups to use their mobile devices. Netflix was still the most popular service to stream on a phone with 47%, Amazon had a 38%, and Hulu had 25%. According to the report, 44% of Americans report experiencing buffering. To tie this into Quibi, there's a couple problems. Quibi specifically will only be available on mobile devices. They specifically said it will not be available on TVs, which we already knew, but it also will not be available on tablets, which means while a tablet still has the ability to do a horizontal or vertical viewing mode, they will not be making it available on tablets. It's only going to be available on phones. Focusing on the phones, okay, fine. I'm not going to say that's a bad idea, because the tablet market is nowhere near as big as the mobile market, so obviously go after the mobile market because it's larger. However, by not allowing people to at least have the ability to have it on their tablets so that they can view it while they're sitting at home on a slightly larger screen than their phones, that's kind of worrisome to me, because I get that, their top, the daily essentials make perfect sense to watch on your phone. But here's this report saying that even the younger generations that they're going to be extremely targeting to get to be their subscriber base, they're only viewing, only 50% of them are viewing the stuff on their phones. So they're going to have to not only convince the other percentage of people to watch the stuff on their phone, but also to pay money for it. And that's the thing. And also let's also keep in mind, there was a report a couple months back that we talked about that said that exact same demographic of people are the people who don't want to spend money on content. They're the ones who will sit through ads in order to watch content. So while, yes, there will be an ad-supported tier that will allow you to watch the content, you're still having to pay for it. And I feel like that's a big miss on their part, is because if they're targeting the younger audience, which doesn't like to pay for that, but also that is the exact same type of audience that is specifically what this content is going to be geared towards, it's a missed opportunity to not have a free tier. So it goes back to what you were saying, they should have a free tier that is ad-supported and either sell more ads or something. The thing is, I understand the reason as to why the ads are sold out, and it's because they only have X amount of content, and that advertisers is buying a specific slot on X show, whatever it may be. So the thing is, it's not necessarily like YouTube where they're paying per view or something like that, where their media or their advertising budget is specifically set on how many people are buying or how many people are watching the content. It's more of we have a show and here's a slot that you can buy for this show. This is what we anticipate the viewing is going to be, unlike what we've see on YouTube or other services. So my thing is, it comes off as, I understand that there's a limit on how many slots they have, but by having some sort of cap where there's only so many advertisers that can buy slots, that seems bad. It seems like, YouTube is obviously making a good chunk of change from advertising, and a lot of those ads are geared personalized, which makes it even more profitable in the larger run for YouTube. But the thing is that works specifically because those ads, they can sell ads forever. Anybody goes back and watches that content later on, they can change the ads. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity. But it just comes to, instead of having ads on demand, like a service like YouTube, and having only slots to sell ads for, you're missing out on that advertising money and also missing out on the ability to have a free model for the audience that you're actually trying to target. So I don't know. To me, I'm still on the fence. Like, there is definitely some content that is coming to Quibi that I want to check out, but I feel like it's in the same boat as like Apple. There's not enough to draw me in to actually make me want to pay for it, and there's definitely not enough content to make me want to be a normal subscriber. So we'll have to see what happens. I mean, honestly, this is kind of like one of those wait and see. I mean, some of the content that they have coming, maybe they'll start releasing some trailers in the next couple months prior to the service launching, and then it'll be like, oh, okay, this looks really good. I can't wait to see what happens with this. I mean, I felt like that for some of the shows that were coming to Apple TV Plus, and I still haven't subscribed to Apple TV Plus to check out some of the shows that I was interested in because I just don't feel the necessity to at this point. There's still plenty of other content on other services that I'm already watching. And I feel like Quibi is going to be trying to compete with YouTube, which is free, while they're not looking at it as they're competing with YouTube, because they don't even mention YouTube. They keep mentioning the other streaming services and how that's long form content and it's not what they're doing. There's already places out there that are creating short form content, and that will be their competition regardless of whether or not they want to acknowledge them or not.
Yeah, I had a big issue with the article. One, I think it kind of, the headline is a little bit misleading. When you look at statistics, you have to, and especially you deal with the population, you have to deal with kind of the demographics, and this headline doesn't take an apart the demographics. It just says 39% of Americans. Well, there's like 300 something Americans, 400 something million, Americans in the United States, and then chop off whatever number that have cell phones. You know what I mean? Like, that's just a large number of people, and it's very diverse. However, 39%, stream TV on their phones. Well, you got to think about America. Like, a lot of adults have TVs. They might, if they're going to stream, they might have a Roku, they might have an Apple TV, they might have some other device to stream on, TVs. Like, and so what's the need for us to stream on our phones unless we're busy in doctor's office or something? You know what I mean? But so it makes sense for, a little bit older people, right, who already have devices, streaming devices, to watch it on their TV. There's not the point of the phone. But the point of the article, right, if you look at a demographic, like, you can tell, like, the older generations, they don't do that because there's not really a need. And, I think some people would be like, well, they're just, just a bunch of old people who can't look at their phones. It's like, well, I mean, there's always some people who do that, but you look at logistically, like, there's no need to do that. Whereas in, the younger generation, like 52%, 55% Gen Z and 52% of millennials stream on the mobile devices. And that's great. And I totally agree with you. Like, I thought the article was misleading because it should have portrayed the metrics in the headline in a different way. It's, hey, look at the demographics of streaming, like, yes, and kind of break it down by the age groups a little bit more of, like, but going from there, I think Quibi is kind of going a little bit of a niche market, and it is because they are targeting, that 55%, that 52% of Gen Z and millennials who do stream on their phones, and Quibi is going after a very tiny market in comparison to, like, Netflix and Hulu and, Disney Plus. It's a very niche market. And going back to the article that you mentioned about how people of the younger generation don't like paying for things. One, they kind of can't. For some people, they just can't because teenagers are broke, you know what I mean? And college students are broke. But even still, they just, I don't mind suffering and sitting through an ad. And, this is what Quibi is trying to capture these people, and charging $5 and an ad is just a little bit ridiculous. And that's my whole premise. That's the one thing I worry about Quibi is, like, I think it is successful. I would check it out if it was ad free, but, like, personally, I think it's just a little bit illogical to pay for something that has advertisements. It's just almost nonsensical to me of, like, why would somebody do that? I really do believe that they're going to bring down their price, right, after this first year, right, after the first 3 months, maybe the first quarter, and they're going to see their subscriber numbers, and if they're not meeting expectations, I can see them lowering down that $5 price. I could see them keeping the $8 as it is, but lowering down that entry because of that. And like you said about limited ad placements, to me that just once again screams like, okay, if you have something that's limited, that's in demand, charge more. And that's kind of my take on the future of Quibi. I think that price has got to come down, and then in the next round of contracts with advertisers, they're going to have to jack up the advertisement, placement fee just more, because if not, then I don't see them continuing. I don't see them having a viable business if that's not the case.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, I think Quibi is fighting
We got to stop agreeing on everything. Stop being so logical and agree.
I don't know that we agree on everything. I mean, the thing is, I think that Quibi is going to be facing an uphill battle because I feel like that price point is not exactly a great entry point for the demographic that they're going in, which I already said. So, I mean, like, it just comes down to, I would expect some changes with Quibi. While there's a lot of people who, there's a lot of industry people that are excited about potential that this has. If it doesn't excite consumers, it's going to have a problem. The problem is that one of the articles that I read, the executives at the company were like, you know, we're going to be marketing a lot, and a lot of the people who are working with us are going to be helping us push the product to the younger demographics and things like that. I was thinking, like, yeah, that only works so much, especially when that celebrity is telling them, hey, everybody, I've got a new show. Come pay $5 a month so you can watch my new show that's going to be released over multiple months. Like, it's just, it's going to be an uphill battle, honestly. I think that they're overestimating the strength of celebrities in general, and that's really what they've been focusing on, and not so much about the fact that, like, it's an uphill battle, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Before we wrap up the episode, I want to talk about The Mandalorian and The Witcher, which we've talked about a couple of times leading up to this episode, but there was an article that came out that we have linked in the show notes, which comes from Business Insider, and they specifically stated that Parrot Analytics, and if you're unfamiliar with them, they're a company that specifically watches impressions on social media to judge the popularity of a show, because a lot of shows that are on the streaming services we don't have exact ratings for, because let's be honest, these services don't want people to know exactly what their numbers are. So there's a company called Parrot Analytics that watches a lot of the impressions of people talking about it to judge the popularity of a show. As it turns out, The Mandalorian came out, then the final, well, actually the first season of The Witcher released. The next week, the final episode of Mandalorian released. The headlines for all the news was The Witcher is more popular than The Mandalorian, because The Witcher is getting way more impressions, and Parrot Analytics is stating it's way, way more popular. Now, I'm not here to sit here and say whether or not The Mandalorian is more popular or The Witcher. I'm just going to give you the cold hard facts, which is, it's almost like comparing apples and oranges, in the sense of The Mandalorian was a show that released one episode per week for 8 different weeks. I guess 7 different weeks, because they released 2 episodes in the first week. That was a spread out release schedule. And The Witcher released their entire 8 episodes on one day. And while the main graph that Parrot Analytics is promoting shows, you know, The Mandalorian going up to the point where, like, the first episode goes, and then it gradually goes up and down every time there's a new episode that releases. You can see little bumps that go up in it, and then when the final episode goes up, there's a little bit of a bigger spike, because now anybody can watch the entire season all at once. The Witcher, however, comes out and it spikes up to almost 3 times the amount of impressions that The Mandalorian did. The caveat, of course, is, and this is what's not necessarily reported in a lot of the clickbait type articles, which is Netflix is available to 160 million subscribers worldwide, which means The Witcher is potentially available to 160 million subscribers worldwide, while The Mandalorian is currently only legally allowed to be viewed within the United States and a few other territories that have Disney Plus, but that subscriber base is estimated to be maxed out at about 25 million. So, like, still a fraction of the total number of viewers that Netflix has. So while, yes, The Mandalorian is not getting as much discussion, it's not even able to be viewed by as many people because of the amount of people who are subscribed to the service. Now, if you take the average of the episodes of The Mandalorian and compare it to the overall total of The Witcher, is just slightly higher as far as that impression goes. And when you compare just the US numbers, The Witcher is also just slightly higher, but it's not enough to make a big deal about it like everybody seemed to make a big deal about. These articles popped up during the holidays. Not a lot of people, like, we didn't talk about it. I wanted to just bring it up because it's, again, one of those things where you see a headline, it's big and flashy, and it's not very informative. It doesn't give you the whole picture. It gives you what they want you to see in order to push the headline to make it flashy and potentially clickbaity.
You know, once again, I have big issues with this article just because it is a little bit of comparing apples to oranges. You know, you're doing a weekly show versus it all being dumped at once? And what was the difference between The Witcher? What was the difference in days between the last episode of The Mandalorian and The Witcher coming out?
It's just 1 week.
1 week. I mean, yeah, that's you're dumping 8 episodes of a show that everyone's, it seems like people really want this TV show. And so you have, one show like The Mandalorian that everyone kind of likes, but it comes out weekly. And then a week later, Netflix is dumping, right, The Witcher, another one everyone kind of likes. But you're dumping all 8 files at once and comparing that to one file that just came out like a week before or maybe 2 weeks before. One, people get recency bias, which is where you tend to remember, things that you just saw more than you did before. That's going to be, at the end of the day, that's kind of what that is. And that's going to be fresh on our minds is, man, is The Witcher so great? You're going to tell everyone about The Witcher, just a few days before you were telling everyone about The Mandalorian. And so The Witcher's more fresh on people's minds. There's more episodes of it. There's more things you can talk about at that moment, because you're on the internet at the moment, you're summarizing, talking about all 8 episodes, where before, all the impressions about The Mandalorian were just about one episode, each. And yes, that accumulates over time and that's great, but the amount of content, in terms of sentiment that people have about engagement, that people talk about it, trending hashtags about it, talking about certain actors, The Mandalorian versus, Witcher, it's just different models. I would love to compare, The Witcher versus another Netflix show, like Netflix for, that would be great, but you comparing it to a weekly show that comes out, to me, it's a little bit unfair. I know that you want to compare these two shows in some quantitative way, but I feel like this kind of failed because of the difference of the two business models, given what those shows were. I mean, it is safe to say that there were a high demand of people, seemingly a high number. There were a seemingly, in the same order of magnitude, number of people who engaged and talked about The Mandalorian as, The Witcher. I think that is a fair assessment to say, but, The Mandalorian, that spread out over, I think there was 8 episodes. So each week they had a ton of engagement every Friday when it came out, except for one of the weeks it came out on Wednesday. So you have every week you have super high engagement, right? 9 times very high engagement. And then, The Witcher, it all comes out one day. That one day's worth of engagement and you go forward just because it's all been dumped. To me, I don't understand. Hopefully I'm explaining my point well. It's just you are comparing apples to oranges. And I know that you can compare, but you also can't compare the differences between the two just because they are so different.
It's one of those things where I think the problem is everybody always wants to pit something against another. I mean,
they want to make it a story because
right.
They are, two big, franchises based in, fiction, which is great. This seems like somebody wanted to create a story, and right, everyone loves to compare between two different properties, and it's like which one's better, like Star Trek or Star Wars. But even at the end of the day, Star Wars came out as movies, and Star Trek at first came out as TV shows. You know what I mean? Like you were once again kind of comparing, apples to oranges.
Yeah, it just cements the thing that I've said before, which is don't always believe the headlines. You have to look a little bit more in depth. I have to give props to Forbes because they posted up an article, which we have linked in the show notes, which dives a lot more into it. And the article itself released like a week after a lot of the other articles had released, talking about which one was better. And they did a good job of showcasing not just the analytics on a graph, but also showcasing why it makes a difference and why these two is really comparing apples to oranges and why it makes such a big difference to not compare them. So props to Forbes for that. But also, let's just be clear here, and I might be a little biased in saying this, but let's ultimately remember which character from these shows is going to be more remembered in the long term. Do we think that The Witcher is going to be best known and is going to stand the test of time, or do we think that Baby Yoda is going to be standing the test of time? And I think that's a pretty obvious answer.
I was just about to go there. I thought you were going to say The Mandalorian, and I was going to be like, excuse me, it's going to be Baby Yoda who's going to be the most important person in the modern day Star Wars franchise.
Exactly. So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. I want to encourage everybody to head over to the website to check out the streaming release calendar. Also, if you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss, we have a week coming up in February that we're going to be doing some topic-specific episodes that we will be covering. So if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, be sure to send us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter and Discord. Links are over on the site to check out all the articles that we talk about here on the podcast and even some articles that we don't. You can follow us on Instagram for all latest announcements related to new episodes of the podcast releasing. This podcast is available on a wide variety of podcast networks, as well as YouTube and over on Pandora. So be sure to check us out and listen to us wherever you feel necessary. In addition to that, I don't always ask for this, but if you are so inclined, we would greatly appreciate if you could give us a review wherever you are currently listening to this episode. If you are listening to it on YouTube, please give it a like. If you are listening to it on Apple iTunes, please leave a review on the iTunes Store or any of the other places that you are listening to the podcast. Please take the time to just shoot us a review. And of course, while we would love to get 5-star reviews across the board, we would appreciate any reviews and feedback. So if you'd like to share feedback with us in general, you can shoot us an email, thestreamingwars@gmail.com. We will be back in just a couple of days with the wrap-up of all of the latest content news. So for Tony and myself, this has been The Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.